I'd been on 2 different antidepressants for almost 25 years by 2008. I was angry a lot. I'd been in rehab twice for alcohol and drugs. 2008 was a rough year, turning 40, But the crazy part was I was so successful though, professionally. Like I was one of these really high functioning, I think is the term they use, but inside it didn't feel high functioning. I felt like I was falling apart. And I kind of thought to myself one day when I was looking at my internet search history, why don't I know as much about me as Google? Like if I look at my search history, it's pretty obvious I have some problems. Like I'm constantly looking up symptoms of diseases and how to navigate stress. Before we had YouTube videos telling you how to date, I was like, how do I say hello to someone? Because the world didn't have this constant technology interface that at that point I was used to. Right? I needed the interface to kind of communicate with people. Made me a great tech salesperson, but nothing else. So this idea of why don't I know as much about myself as my devices kind of morphed into what happens, because I have the skills, if I hacked every single device around me and made it display my life, so it wasn't hidden in my browser history, if I made like browser cookies for life. So today's talk is called Becoming a Mindful Cyborg, Beyond Peace in a Hyper-Connected World. And it's hard to be hyper-connected. I'm pretty hyper-connected and have been for 15 years. But I wanted to share with you some of the things and strategies and ways that I've found to find a little bit of reprieve. There seems to be two camps in the world today. People who want you to unplug and run from the world. We call them the uber rich. And the people understand it's impossible because everything we do is involved being connected to something to feed our families. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. As Alex said, if you go to Google right now and you put in most connected, my name will come right up. And it's pretty cool because it used to be world's most connected man and it was a lot of things, but slowly over time it's become most connected. And my goal really has always been just to be able to Google most. Because I just think it's just one of those things where just Google most. And it's weird because a lot of people think, well, that means you're connected to people, you're most connected on LinkedIn, and it really was none of those things. It was just how I used the different technology and sensors. I did a TED Talk in 2014 out in Vienna, but since then there have been 5 TED Talks that mention me. So that's kind of one of those mic drop moments when people make TED Talks about you. If my parents were still alive, that probably really impressed them. I have all the normal stuff you get with speakers. I've written a book and been in magazines, all the press kind of stuff. And I've helped some pretty major companies do cool stuff. Worked with Coca-Cola on those freestyle machines, met with Spotify about their year-end review. I mean, if there's a part of life that's hyper-connected, I probably have some small part in it. And I apologize for the parts that haven't worked out well for us. The agenda today, I kind of wanted to make super simple. I'm getting wanting to float, but I won't. The first section I'm going to talk about is kind of the me.com, the kind of my story. And I think it's really important to understand kind of where I came from and what my thinking was about going from how do I hack my health to how do I hack my spirituality. The second section is really about you and your lived experience and what it's like, what I feel it might be like for someone who's really coming to terms with what it's like to never be offline. It's overwhelming. And I don't think we talk enough about that. We talk about the downside to it, but we don't really talk about the benefits. And then finally, the last section is the section probably I think everyone's most excited for, and that's us. Like, how do we move forward and what types of strategies can we do to make this work? I jokingly say this talk will be at 2x speed so that we can play it back at half speed. It'll make more sense. I do talk a little fast, so as I said earlier, if you need me to slow down, do that, but I've got to get through a little bit in the next 40 minutes. So I've got 3 big warnings about this talk that I need you to know, just so you understand a little bit where my bias lies and doesn't lie. The first thing is I am not anti-technology. All right? A lot of people are anti-technology, but I'm also not pro-technology. I think if you look back over the last 100 years or so, whether it's a cartoon from 1906 about how telegrams will ruin our ability to interact with each other, or 1923, how home telephone will ruin our ability to interact with each other, to 1955, how newspapers will ruin our ability to interact with each other, we've really got to come to terms and stop blaming other things and start accepting responsibility for how we use our different pieces of technology. The second warning is I'm very anti-mindful consumerism. Today you can like Shawn Mendes, buy his album, and then have him meditate with you and take you on a walk. I think we're kind of blurring the line between celebrity and healthcare, and it's just not going to work out well if we all look like Kim Kardashian. So I really want to pull back from this idea that there's a way through celebrity for us. The last thing that I think a lot of people think is I'm very pro-techno-mindfulness. And why I think mindfulness is super important, if we look at the history of mindfulness over the last 30 years or so, they just keep going back to the money bucket. How to extract more money from people to be mindful. And I think you can be mindful with just your phone buzzing you every 20 minutes with someone needing you if you realize that buzz is someone needing you. But a lot of people would rather spend $20 on an application. So just kind of hang out with that. So a little bit of Christery, that's a word I made up that my mom always thought it was funny I would say that. I was born in 1968. I had a normal childhood. You can see my first computer there in the early 80s. I had a bunch of birds too. My parents said, "Do you want a dog?" I said, "I don't want birds." Why? I said, "They don't need to be walked." I was one of those kids in the 80s. By the 90s, of course, I had the cell phones and all the devices and things. And by the 2000s, I had a server in my basement serving up a web page and all that kind of stuff. So I was always pretty out there and connected. By 2008, my health had really suffered. I had turned 40 years old. I weighed 320 pounds, about 100 pounds more, 110 pounds more than I weigh today. I'd been on 2 different antidepressants for almost 25 years by 2008. I was angry a lot. I'd been in rehab twice for alcohol and drugs. 2008 was a rough year, turning 40, But the crazy part was I was so successful though, professionally. Like I was one of these really high functioning, I think is the term they use, but inside it didn't feel high functioning. I felt like I was falling apart. And I kind of thought to myself one day when I was looking at my internet search history, why don't I know as much about me as Google? Like if I look at my search history, it's pretty obvious I have some problems. Like I'm constantly looking up symptoms of diseases and how to navigate stress. Before we had YouTube videos telling you how to date, I was like, how do I say hello to someone? Because the world didn't have this constant technology interface that at that point I was used to. Right? I needed the interface to kind of communicate with people. Made me a great tech salesperson, but nothing else. So this idea of why don't I know as much about myself as my devices kind of morphed into what happens, because I have the skills, if I hacked every single device around me and made it display my life. So it wasn't hidden in my browser history. If I made like browser cookies for life, right? So like with a smart microwave in 2008, could I somehow understand what I'm eating better? With smart lights in 2010, could I somehow understand like when I'm going to bed and why? Much less, we weren't even at sleep at that point. The problem with this is where do you store your entire life, right? It's like the quantified self is this movement that's been going on for some time, and I'm, neither here nor there, but there's not a good way, and technology is usually a poor receptacle for the lived experience. So one of my favorite tools ever growing up was a calendar. It really started in the 70s when I was under 10 years old. My mom, every year at the end of December, we'd get a calendar from the Hallmark store, and my mom would sit in one chair and I'd sit in the next, and she'd read all the important events from that year, and we'd write them into the new calendar. Does anybody remember this, how we used to work with calendars? And it was really kind of meaningful to me because I realized the calendar was kind of this important technological advancement from my mother that really showed how she loved and what she valued, right? Because if you didn't make the calendar, it was like, okay, the grandparents stuff all, but did you have any events that year made the calendar? So I choose to put all of my life into a Google Calendar. So in 2008, the technology I used to do this was pretty simplistic. It would just grab anything that had an API that I could talk to, or anything that I could actually send data to a social media account. It's strange, a lot of this technology today will let you share something on Twitter, but not with your spouse. And I think it's really telling that we lock so much of our data away in these systems, but they'll let them share them with strangers. So I created all these fake, like you could go to Twitter today and look at Dancy Air, Dancy Entertain, they're all still there. What I would do is have these private Twitter accounts that would take all this information and move it to a calendar. This calendar allowed me to quickly start to understand a lot of my behavior, because calendars, suddenly you can see an entire day's worth of behavior. I color coded it so I knew if I was doing things that didn't align with the type of values I had, but I could also search it like really quickly. And this allowed me to kind of understand this really deep connection I had to interfaces, technology, and others. But it went so much more deeper than that. So, an average day would have anywhere from 100 to 3, 4, 5,000 appointments. And the appointments were in different areas of my life, so health and work. They were very simple back in that day. Am I explaining this in a way where it makes sense, where you understand what I did and a little bit like using a calendar as you would see your whole life, sort of? Okay, we'll get more into this. So each one of these points were a data point. So I wore a belt, so if I was sitting in my chair for too long and I got up from my chair, it would log that I finally stood up. So I could start to understand, like, oh, you're moving, and then moving would start to create better behaviors. I'll try to make it something a little bit more obvious. So when I would do something online, like post something online or watch a bunch of Netflix or leave a terrible review on Yelp, it would put the data points in my calendar, but the shadow of those data points would then be recorded. So someone liking or commenting, the lack of getting anything done after I binge a bunch of Netflix, and the fact that I would treat people poorly the more I got feedback to treat people poorly. It sounds like obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me. And what was really strange was, especially with social media, my friends, when I would do things like be drunk or act crazy or do something stupid and put it on Facebook, they loved those things. But if I did something like I'm going for a walk, or I haven't had a cigarette in 3 hours, nobody mentioned it. So it was one of these things where suddenly it was obvious to me that the interface wasn't doing me any favors. I was great TV for the people who loved me, but I was not a good character for my story. And obviously my story had to go on. Is Alex still here? Oh, hey, Alex. Sorry, I've known Alex for a while now, so it's I've never really talked about some of these things to him, and we've talked a lot about the meanings of these things. And thank you again, Alex, for allowing me to come. So after I had this kind of system where I was putting everything in there, it became obvious to me the next most important thing I need to do is find a way to prioritize all of these data points. Now, being 40 years old and having the type of life I didn't really have a framework for prioritizing it. So I literally borrowed Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just because I didn't have a better system. I'm not a PhD. I'm really not very learned at all. Things just make sense to me, but I haven't read them. It's just I know them. So to that, I went through and prioritized all my technology so it would fit in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So suddenly the applications and services and sensors I would use back in 2012 would fit neatly in there, and I was only allowed to use them if certain conditions had been met in the pyramid. So the thing I used to say is my Instagram would be locked out if I hadn't had lunch. There was a way that I could use the technology, whether it was I couldn't use Twitter unless I was walking. So I hacked all of my devices in a way so that it would actually make life, give me kind of almost training wheels, technological training wheels, to be able to get things done. I went after I did that and then went through and I talked a little about social media and entertainment, and you saw opinion, but I started then mapping over these years more different pieces of my life into another type of pyramid. So just the raw data, the information, the knowledge and wisdom, this is another type of pyramid, DIKW they call it. So what types of things would be at the top of, what type of data would be at the top of that, what type of data would be a little bit lower, et cetera, et cetera. And again, these were things that just kind of made sense or felt natural to me. By 2016, I was able to have my life printed into books yearly that I gave to friends and family. They also allowed me to get rid of friends and family that weren't really fitting to the value set that I was developing to have, which can be hard to do, And then in 2010, so by 2016 there was a DNA book. 2010 I was able to get a lot of DNA work done. The really interesting thing about that was I had a lover in 1993 who passed away from HIV in bed next to me. And for years I wondered why did I never become infected, and had a lot of survivor guilt from that. And come to find out that I was resistant. I was one of those people that couldn't get HIV, which kind of messed with my head so bad, because back in the early 90s, being gay and having a lover who was positive and in a sero-discordant relationship, a lot of judgment. My friends didn't want to hang out with me because I might make them sick or something. So, COVID's been hard for people like me who survived HIV, and then to watch kind of some of the things that are going on today. By 2018, I had a good decade's worth of different types of behavioral stacks, different data collections that allowed me to really see my life, but I had been single still by 2018. So I was doing a lot to orchestrate the data in my life, but it wasn't quite there yet. Which brought me to my first big realization in kind of my journey, which is we don't download apps, we download habits. And I think we don't talk today to each other enough about, we often say, what app are you using? We don't say, what habit have you created? You know, we don't talk about how these applications and services, they teach you to write, they teach you to talk, they teach you to think. If all your friends are in Facebook, your Facebook is your way to communicate, right? And as some of you know, you can have 5 emotions in Facebook. 5. Right? There's a few more, right? So for me, I had to really come to terms with what does it mean to be fully immersed in a world where everything is mediated for me. So like again, 2018 came and I had still been single, but I had met someone in 2016 and 2018 was the year that I got married. So this was my second partner. His name is Fernando. We were married at Disney World. You can see the castle back there. We got married at Disney World on Groundhog Day because I wanted to get married in a place that didn't change on a day that didn't end. And it was important for me because my mother in the 70s took me to Disney World. In 1977, I was 9, and we were walking down the main street in Disney World, and my mother started crying. I never saw her cry. And I said, "What's wrong, Mom?" She goes, "Christopher, it's the first time I haven't been worried about you." You know? And it really made me think to myself how amazing places can be for cementing kind of values and relationships. So I call this kind of period of my life the worldwide family. So I went back to the drawing board and said, okay, I need to build a system now that has not only me, but has my spouse and our pets and my business and everything else like that. So I went through and started mapping all these different connections because now I've got 2 people's health and 2 people's, you know, you people with kids know what I'm talking about. There's a lot to manage with family. So the system I built, I call it Dare Table, listed both, you know, me, my spouse, our family, our business, and then all of these different things. And the first 6 that I built on was Value Kit. And it was built on the fact that we sat down as a family with my in-laws and defined what our values were as a family. So health, home, family. And this value system then dictated what decisions were made. I wasn't using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was using our family's system of needs. And it really made this really great way of seeing not only who we were and what we valued, but then we could underpin things like our health care and this kind of memory timeline thing. From there, I went ahead and said, well, we have values and we have things we're working on as a family. This is 5, 6 years old now. You know, what types of things do we have to do? You know, so tasks, interactions. My doctor, my lawyer, everyone in my life goes through a web portal and logs into my system. I don't log into their system. If I'm paying you, I'm not going to your horrible tech. You know, and yet we don't empower people to think about what would it be like if you were the owner of not only your values and your relationships, but all the data you have, right? That's my gift to you, right? I don't know, but it makes me a little anxious the 3rd time I have to fill out the same form. It's not. I'm 54 years old. I don't have that many forms left in me, right? So come to my site, right, and help me do it. Tasks, projects, and goals. You know, and we thought about that. You know, goals were things we'd like to get done every 5, 10 years, and projects were every couple of years. Tasks we do monthly. So my whole family sat down and talked about that. Money Kit was the second system I built, which basically had all of my providers. Like I said, they go to these websites and log in as me. It would have our bills, our accounts. So, you know, quickly, you know, when we're buying homes and things like that, we'd be able to get to that. Business Kit was how I actually worked with my clients and customers, whether they be tech companies or universities, and I wanted to speak. Like when they wanted me to come speak, and I'm like, well, here's a website with all my talks, and you can pick my talks by emotion. So if you want inspirational and provocative, it'll filter out a talk for you. Because I find like most people want to feel something. They don't want to be communicated to. They want to be felt with. So that was really important to me to kind of create a system that was more based on feelings. And of course, assets, you know, what's in our home, where there are critical documents, where have we been. Apps are just documents that are living in someone else's system, so making sure we kept track of those. Which kind of led me in 2019 to start to see the world very differently, because just having spent 3 years connecting to beyond myself, to my partner and to my business and creating systems for my lawyers, I started to see that my role was to be a facilitator of data to my community, because my community didn't understand even what they had. They had a bunch of people who some wanted to play by rules, some didn't. I called them the blinkers and the non-blinkers. You know, I return the grocery cart, I don't return the grocery cart. You know the people. So like, what could we do to kind of learn from each other? So this was our home in 2017, but it lived right on this creek, which loves to flood. We were looking at a house in Hilo a few years ago, and you guys have a loves to flood area in Hilo also. So it was really, it was like, are you sure you want to move there? I'm like, I'm dealing with flood. You call me Noah. I've dealt with floods so often. But sure enough, we had a flood in 2018, which allowed me then to come back in and start before that flood, create this map for my neighborhood so they could start to see what the resources were. And I made this public to them to say, okay, we're going to be fine. You know, we won't lose power because we've got these, you know, the police stations across the way, and just a lot of things that are helping people understand, like, it's not as doom and gloom as you think. Right now, because a lot of things going on in the world, people have this doom and gloom feeling. From there, I went ahead and built a system off of my system for the neighborhood that allowed anyone in the neighborhood, we had a lot of older folks, people that are in their 80s and 90s, to have a quick way in a mobile app to log a question or submit help from any of their neighbors. It's kind of like Nextdoor, but just for our neighborhood. From there, we were allowed, I created a system so that the police could log in and see reported incidences. Because a lot of times we would report stuff to the police, but they never let us know what happened. Just went into a black hole. It didn't after I got done with it. And like, so crime went down, people with loose dogs went down, people taking care of each other went up, you know what I mean? And all it took was a map and the ability for people to log and feel like they were being heard, you know? So many government websites just goes into a hole and you get an email confirmation. Then you call and talk to a stranger who wants you to dig that email out and find an 8-digit number you can't possibly read. I can't keep 3 numbers in my head at the same time. And, you know, it just doesn't work. You know, so for me, this was a really important evolutionary step. And then by the time the pandemic went, we already had a system. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we uploaded all sorts of medical devices so we could share, because the hospitals were really overrun where we were. And this allowed me to put a front end on the community and allow people to understand what type of community we were, what type of things we valued, and what type of people lived there. Interestingly enough, we had people leave the community because I built this, because I was trying to take over the community. It feels that way when you're asked to follow rules the rest of us do. That's what it feels like. If you feel violated, you probably shouldn't be here, right? And I think it's really important we talk about, like, what does that mean in kind of a hyper-technology society? So for me, by 2020, I started saying, well, gosh, we've got more than climate. We've got these societal issues and these infrastructure issues. So Houston, where we were, so many problems. I mean, the politics and just the violence and the shootings, and it was hard on me and my family. So we started out looking for a place we could move in the continental United States. But I actually started using data to actually find which places were safest from just a climate perspective, right? Because, like, if you move to someplace remote enough, people isn't that much of an issue, but the climate can still get you. So we found a couple places, these places in purple, we could relocate to. Actually, Hawaii was one of them. And we found this great little place up here in upstate New York, and that's where we moved. So because I had everything already built, it allowed us to take our current house and sell our house without a realtor, because I just literally built a website, 1611 York Minster, HoustonTexas.com. And then I put a sign up with just a QR code that pointed to that website, and the people who would go to that website would, like, take a tour of our house. Then I found a realtor, and I said to her, I created a program that scraped Zillow to look for houses in the climate zone we wanted and schedule appointments with us. And these houses had to be in communities with certain crime and other types of social responsibility statistics. I was really proud of the system. It really helped us, and we were able to buy a house. This is it. This is where I've lived now since May. We call it Persephone Manor. Each of the floors, Persephone brought the seasons. Each of the floors is outfitted with a lot of technology that helps condition the house. We'll talk about it a little bit. And of course, I went there and recreated a similar system because we have a problem with speeders. And I created what I call the shame system. So we have six cameras on the front of the house that photograph everybody speeding at a certain mile per hour. It triangulates their speed, grabs their license plate, if it's a DOT truck, the truck driver, and then tweets out the trucks and tags the companies. So within a month, the sheriff came to visit me. I'm not kidding. I literally don't care anymore. You know, data is like one of those things that can empower us. We just don't have good examples of data leaders. So the sheriff said, can you stop this? Because the county commissioner is going to upset because businesses don't want to do work here. I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll stop doing this if you start doing police work. They dropped the speed limit in the town. We have a police officer who sits on our property 3 times a week. The speed has gone down. We haven't had any cats killed in 3 months because animals would be killed on the road. You know what I mean? So it was a very empowering moment for me. Now, that being said, the mayor of my village hates me because in 3 months I did more than he's done in 15 years. But he doesn't want to be mayor. He wants to be king. And I just want to be a good neighbor. There's a difference. So it was this remarkable time for me, and it really started allowing me to go back and say, well, what types, because I've spent a lot of time working on health and environment. So I recently got a biological age done. I'm 5 years biologically younger than I actually am. My cumulative rate of aging is actually below normal. So in some ways, I'm kind of this cyborg Benjamin Button compared to my peers. So hopefully I can come back and visit you, University of Hawaii, in 10 years and be 40-something. But it took me to my second most important lesson when I thought about how we're all connected and what tech could be used for, and that's we don't know how to measure what we care about, so we care about what we measure. And I think it's so important that we start to ask each other, well, what are the metrics that are driving you? Our work gives us metrics, our doctors give us metrics, society gives us metrics. But are those metrics your metrics? Because my metrics are about safety and kindness and making sure my community felt supported and heard. They make me feel successful. The minute I stopped paying attention to what other people wanted me to measure, I found myself. Right? There's no need to overthink this anymore. So the next part of my journey was kind of this idea of search within. So I built this system back in 2018 called Care Table. Dare Table, Care Table, get it? But I wanted to see if I could somehow think a little bit differently about spirituality. And to me, as I got older, time became something I was really sensitive to. So I created a database, and there's 24 hours in one day. So I created 20 years, so the next 20 years of worth of data with all the sunrises and sunsets for the next 20 years, all the moon cycles for the next 20 years, all the seasons for the next 20 years, all the sabbats, which are the points between the seasons, all the actual astrological points in the year, all the, for the next 20 years, all the Chinese lunar solar events, and also all the celestial processions. Now, obviously, I'm not going to live 25,000 years, but I have the data in case I do. Because what I thought was really interesting about this was, what if I could take this massive database of time and start to interact with it around not only myself, but how I feel about life. And it allowed, this is the database, you can see the stack here, so it's all of these events were in there, but it allowed me to realize that a whole bunch of points in time could be hacked to create something. So, on full moons in Cancer and the year of the ox, are there certain synchronicities? My whole point with doing this was I'd become so good at tracking biological and behavioral and societal things. Could I start to kind of understand the bigger systems of time, or basically tie woo to quantified data? Could I quantify woo? Part of that journey was actually creating a database within the time database that had the 7 primary emotions and 82 emotional combinations that create those. So you can see those. They're just disgusted, disapproving, and judgmental. And then in the database, those emotions would get logged depending on when I would having them. I went a step further and had a tarot deck digitized, so it would automatically pull readings for me each day, kind of like my own personal astrology. And then it sends me an email each day to let me know where I am in time. So if I start to feel like life's going a little too fast, it says, well, you're only on day 97 of 365, and you might want to do these things because of the moon. I never paid attention to the moon. It was a quarter moon the other night. Alex was taking me around the north part of the island, and just knowing it was the quarter moon, but having no idea what day it was, felt powerful. Right? Just knowing the season without looking at a calendar felt powerful. Knowing the time without ever looking at a watch feels powerful. There's a set of data that just lives on Earth that has just so fundamentally been transformative for me. Also wrote that calendar into my calendar. That was a nod to my mom right there. And also created a Twitter bot that goes ahead and tweets out the day of the year, and created a website, caretable.app, that anyone can go ahead and have their cards read. So then it was well, can I merge these kind of two truly disparate systems? This one that has all this spiritual woo, and this one that has so much of my actual life data in it. And that allowed me to build this interface. I just won a software contest with this interface that has basically every day in a person's life and allows them to interact with their feelings. So I want to go back and see all the times that I felt happy, who was in my life, all the times I felt disgusted, what companies was I dealing with, all the times that I was overeating, and what places did I go. This was now visible to me. And it's something I always dreamed of being able to do, is making what I've done accessible to just anyone around the world. I then linked that system to my house. So in my office, I keep the time machine, I call it, but then it links to my time altar in the other rooms in the house, and then ties into my devices. So when I switch a value setting in my life, like I was showing Alex earlier, if I switch a value setting on my phone or my watch, everything in my life switches. Right? So think of it like an interface that surrounds you full time. It's really kind of cool. which allowed me then to well, what if we went beyond smart homes and talked about wise homes? So the first wise home attribute I built 2 years ago was, in Texas we have no seasons. So I built all of these things using senses as our guide and using smart tech to affect the senses so that automatically I would have seasons inside our house. So it was like walking into another reality. When I've done so much more with this then. I can slow time down now, I can speed time up inside the house, I can replay days using sense and lighting. I can replay the day we got married just from the data of that in our living room anytime I want. It's kind of lovely. And I think so much of what we're missing about technology today is the interface will go away. We're not gonna have phones for the next 20 years. And what are we left with? And I hope we're left with like really these beautiful data memories. There's some examples of the house changing over the seasons. So it was super important to me to kind of get this done, which leads me to this idea of like everyday cyborgs. Like I might be I was a little bit ahead in 2008, I was a little bit ahead in 2015, I'm a little bit ahead now, but today you guys are pretty connected. I have a friend here in Hawaii who's about to have a baby. Today babies come into this world kind of fully plugged in, kind of like Neo from the movie. And we don't really talk about the profundity of someone who's being fully connected from birth. The toys we buy our kids are connected full time. I never even heard of Elf on a Shelf, I'll be honest with you, but people seem to find it's a reason to put a camera in your house. Like maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. Apple has all these ways you can track and monitor your kids. It's really strange. Everybody doesn't want to be tracked, but they love to track their kids. And it's just like, we have to be careful with this idea of surveillance when we're anti-surveillance, but unless it's in the home. I'm against, all sorts of things, but in my home they're okay. I grew up with a man like that. He was a terrible, terrible, abusively man. It wasn't okay outside, but at home it could happen. Microsoft has a whole system now where you can track and monitor your family. Amazon does too. And again, I'm all pro technology. I just think there's a time to parent, right? Just be a parent. Google too, it's kind of wonderful. Facebook's blowing my mind. They've got an app messenger for kids. Netflix, God, we have an 11-year-old, my husband's sister who stays with us. And we added her to our Netflix, you can see it. That's her, right? That's not her, that's a picture of another child. But we started getting these reports when we added her showing us what she watched. And then I started getting these emails telling me what I could talk to her about based on what she was watching. And I said to my husband, I said, we can still talk to Destiny, right? Like, we don't have to pay attention to this email. And he goes, and my husband's a school teacher, he goes, well, sometimes it's a good conversation starter. I said, oh, in the 90s, we would just start them. You didn't know if they were gonna work until you actually tried it out. It was like a fitting room for social norms. Does it fit? No, it makes me uncomfortable. Well, we'll talk about it then. But what is a cyborg? Because I like to talk about this idea of cyborgs and being a mindful cyborg. Our relationship with tools has always evolved. We've gotten better at using our tools in some ways. My friend Amber Case has a great TED Talk from 2010 called We're All Cyborgs Now. Cyborg is just any organism still living that has restored function or enhanced abilities due to something, but relies on a set of feedback. That's the part of cyborgism everybody forgets. That's the part that's stumbling up the world right now. Right? We all like this part, but we don't take advantage and see the pitfalls in this part. The feedback loops have gotten so wickedly fast and we're not talking about them. One of the earliest kind of cybernetic pioneers was Douglas Engelbart, who in '68 had this great demo about how we could use technology in the future by talking to it. Stephen Mann from MIT in 1981, he built a whole apparatus. He kind of pioneered this idea of virtual reality, but what he really liked was this idea of modulated reality. So his eye sensors actually changed street signs to send him reminders from his spouse because he didn't want to see advertisement. Really, really amazing. Neil Haberson, who couldn't see colors, built an apparatus to hear them. There's a friend of mine named Rob Spence, who lost an eye in a hunting accident, replaced his eye with a camera. Me from 2014 with a lot of sensors. It's amazing how many sensors I don't need that are just built in what I have now. I spent a lot of time in Sweden in the middle part of the decade. A lot of people in Sweden have chips in their hands. And those chips all them buy things, ride the train. They don't even use their phones for that type of thing. It's very common over there now. By 2016, you had Snap spectacles and all sorts of wearables. This blew my mind. There was about 2017, 2016, we started watching people in a pretty high clip unbox things. This is the thing. So we don't buy things. We actually have other people buy things and we watch them open them. It's like this weird proxy Christmas for strangers. But that's why I was like, okay, we're really becoming super cybernetic at this point. We love to watch other people play games, but we really love it when their heart rate is showing so we can see how upset they are. Reaction videos kind of blows my mind. So not only do we watch people open things, but we watch people watch things to see how they feel watching them. Have you seen this? No. And I just think maybe we should talk about feelings more if we have to have other people have them for us. You know what I'm saying? Because, I mean, you might think I'm weird for logging my feelings, but I have them. I hate them. They're scary, but I work with them, you know? So it's really interesting. And today, you know, I see a lot of young kids. My husband teaches middle school. Their earbuds don't leave their ears ever. Tim Cook talks about how they've been built for all-day comfort. And last year, Apple sold more earbuds and watches than they sold iPhones in the first 5 years. So putting technology in your body and on your body is more common than it was to have a smartphone less than a decade ago. So that's when I tell people, don't worry, you won't have a smartphone and by 2030. They go, oh, that's not true. I'm like, you'll see. If you're carrying a smartphone in 2030, you're in a dead-end career. Right? It's like no one has a smartphone in 2030. It's in you, full time. One of my favorite videos from 2020 during the pandemic, kid couldn't get his father's attention, but knew the father paid attention to the doorbell, so he communicated with his dad just through the doorbell. Again, we will learn to adapt, right? Right? You're a smart kid, right? We use our technology for our babies and for our aging parents, and we don't really think about all the ways our technology enhances our natural senses now. Everything from attention to audio to visual to how we connect. Our devices have become these hyper ways of connecting, so we don't think of them as extended senses. I believe we're heading to what I call the identity singularity, where people thought we would merge with machines and we would look a lot different. But I believe what we're seeing happen now is we're becoming so intermeshed with them that you don't know if you're talking to someone who's online while they're online talking to you. Like literally, they're literally online doing things because they're creating their next post or composing an email or something else like that. It's kind of a profound part of the world. So I always like to say, can you spot the technology on me? So some of you were here earlier. How many pieces of tech do you think I am wearing right now?
Your watch.
Yes, I definitely got a watch. Anyone want to name anything else?
On the other arm, another watch.
Yep, I got two. Yep.
You got a camera in your classes?
Yep. So I can listen to music while I'm talking to you. I can talk to my spouse while I'm talking to you using bone conductivity. I can film. I can take pictures. They're bifocals because I'm 54. Anyone else?
Ring.
No, it's just wedding. That's just love. The original tech.
The one next to your watch.
The one next to my watch, yes, that's a good one. So this is Amazon Halo. It listens to me all day long and tells me if I've been mean. So by using the words you use and how you speak to people, so I get a score every day. Because to me, even on my best days, I can be a little short. Just being honest. So yeah, there's my Halo. And oh, we forgot the main one. My jacket is covered in sensors. So normally, I couldn't do it here. I can control the slides with my sleeve, make phone calls, text. So sensors are like a lot of things now. And these are, I'll be honest with you, these are all 2 and 3 years old, this type of technology. So I guess the whole point is, be careful who you're talking to. You never know what they're doing. But I'll be honest with you, the glasses help so much because if someone gets a little bit uncomfortable with me, I just start recording. I don't even have to pull my phone out. And they just keep going. I'm like, oh, this is good TV. You just keep going, and they get mad and you don't respond, but you're recording. Which leads me to like this big point that I think we all need to get used to, which is we can't escape technology because we've become it. We need to just get used to we are technology. Like we're so enmeshed with it now. Which thinks about like emotions and moods. One of the things I learned about all of my technology use is different apps live in time space. So there's some apps that are kind of like about things that happened recently. There's some apps that I only use when I need something in the moment. Some apps show me like the past or big points in the past, things I've forgotten about. Some apps are all about the future. I call that the soon. Some apps are about the real far future, right? So apps are really interesting. I don't know about you guys, but does anybody shop by looking at Google and saying when a store is not busy? I don't care if they don't have my product. I just don't want them to have people. So, and I realized once I figured out that all technology lives on this time continuum, it allowed me to see that actually those time continuum apps make me have feelings. So all apps that are built around temporarily giving me information make me anxious. And apps that are built around the now make me impatient. I usually multitask. So usually the feelings I have to where they are in time help me kind of adjust my time, adjust my feelings for time. And again, there's all this new technology about emotional manipulation. That's from my Halo. But do any of you use Grammarly? Yay, Grammarly, Grammarly, whoop, whoop. So Grammarly, whoop, Grammarly has a tone detective in it. So it tells you how you sound. Right? Remember we used to send like a paper to someone so they could read this? Alex was telling me about some papers, so I read them and I'm like, okay. But like the tone detective, I can always tell when someone sends me something wrote with Grammarly, I'm like, okay, you're devoid of all emotion. This was written on Grammarly. And then like I was saying earlier, the way technology has a way of constraining our emotions. On Twitter you can have 2 emotions. On LinkedIn you can have 5 now, and on Facebook you can have, well, how many can you have now? 6? 7. So again, I think it's really profound to think about, are the apps you're using changing the way you feel because you can only feel so much? This usually happens in marriage. Right? You usually don't have for you being married, you know what I'm talking about. Which led me to this kind of the next big realization. You'll only ever be as happy as the interfaces you use to express your feelings. Right? And I always encourage anyone who uses a lot of technology, think about how you're allowed to emote. So this idea of life after the interface is kind of this next big point. So if we think about how interfaces are going, they're evolving to the point where they're becoming virtually invisible, whether it's Google or Apple or Amazon. We have all these ways we're taking the physical interface, even Facebook, out of things. And this chart I created about 5 years ago kind of illustrates that. How you can see the space between the hardware, the media, and the interface has slowly been evolving. A lot of people don't realize how far into cyborg and alternate realities we are. Everyone's talking about, there's so much misinformation. No, it's information. I mean, it's not misinformation to the people who are suffering. They're just in it. And it's really interesting to think about how that's going to affect us, more so when it comes to like what AI is doing. So in the past, historically, your decision making and artificial intelligent decision making was pretty much until 2015. You were doing most of your thinking, but today it's close to 40%. And I always say to people, how often do you not take the route GPS offers you? You usually take it. How often do you say, well, that's not really the song I wanted, and you just take it? Question?
No, I was just agreeing.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So this is kind of a big deal because I don't find people participating with the technology because there's a convenience addiction. I don't think we have a tech addiction. I think we have a convenience addiction. And my fear is in the next 5 to 10 years, we're really going to see a lot of the uncomfortable things we're seeing in the population become more as it just becomes easier to do these things. Because I believe we become the people we log in as. So you have to be very careful about the amount of automation and convenience in the technology you're using. But it's led us to this idea of values as a service. So this is the good part. Today there are email systems that kind of tell you, hey, do you want to set aside some time to actually take a break? I mean, this is new. This is the feeling tech, I call it. Your boss can then get updates saying if you're doing email past a certain hour, it's really good. I call it Big Mother, not Big Brother. The way we say thank you to people has changed. For about 7 years, you could actually have a birthday on Facebook where you actually had a donation to something. That's a nice way of moving this. Amazon, if you use Amazon, has a way you can use Amazon Smile. Everything you buy from Amazon actually has a donation tied to it. There's so many ways. LGBTQAI+ has just seen radical changes in technology. Everything from the companies that every June decide to change their logo, but more importantly, companies that actually put safety meters, like TripIt, into where you're staying, how safe will you be, or companies like Lyft, not Uber, that actually will allow you to set your pronouns. I love this idea of values tech. Or mental health, Apple obviously with screen time, but in certain countries in the world, like Sweden, if you're sharing things that looks like you might be depressed, it actually gives you advice and help, which is super nice. Facebook does something very similar. So it's very, very profound. To climate, Lyft actually will send you carbon neutral cars. Snapchat has a way of putting filters on to understand climate where you live. Facebook has had the disaster check-in for 7 years. Airbnb has open homes, which is just remarkable. Recently, my house, I got offered Nest Renew. So my house will cool down and behave differently. I can opt into a program. Even just recently, Apple allows clean charging, so when you plug in your phone, it'll only charge at the best time. And when I flew here to visit you guys, for the first time ever, a trip, it allowed me to see my carbon footprint, which made me feel really bad. So next time I have to leave earlier and come on a boat. It's tough stuff over where I lived in Texas, like gun violence. We're seeing tech companies address that now. Democracy, we know, is a big deal. I mean, I'm sure you guys have noticed every tech platform has a way of working with democracy. We've seen a lot more tech focused on racism and combating racism, which is really amazing. The things we're seeing in Ukraine and the help we've seen to go to Ukraine, the way people are raising money to help those people. But some of my favorite are called these hypertextuals. So the way emojis have transcended our ability to think about guns from 2013 to think about guns now, to think about needles in 2020 versus think about needles now, or even how we deal with gender. It's really wonderful. I believe we're really heading in this time of where we're leaving the age of personal tech, 1990 to 2020, and heading toward a world of population tech. And that's where we are now. We're seeing a lot of our technology be focused and aimed directly at all of us, not just us. See, I believe it's time we stop valuing our tools and start tooling our values. And it's really important to think about that because there's an application or a system you're using you couldn't make reflect your values. So what are some hacks for you guys? I created some kind of think about hacks and I put them into like 5 steps. And you'll notice up here there's little rating scales. Some of them will be harder than others, but they're just some quick little things for you to think about. So the first section is to give your device the silent treatment. A lot of people think it's like an all or nothing proposition, just turn your phone off. But there's so many ways you can actually lower the intensity of your phone to help it become a less of a overwhelming energy suck. I think a lot of people have trouble with their phones. Same thing with your wearables. So I always say there's a lot of ways you can silence it without just turning it completely off. Play with those levels of silencing before you try to just mute things completely. One of my favorites, the most difficult, is they sell privacy glass for your phones and your devices. Not because I'm worried that anyone's going to look at my devices, but oftentimes I notice the light from my devices. So privacy glass kind of mutes that light out, not completely. It's super neat. See, because you can't be distracted by what you can't see. Step 2, learn to surf your internet. This is one of my favorite ones. So rename your mobile phone and your computers. These are my computers and devices in my house. Tenderness, you were always home, you were loved, focus on balance, groundlessness. And what's great is, people who will, go to Bluetooth, like, what is this? I'm like, it's me. Oh my gosh, why would you do that? Because that's who I am, But George's iPhone seems to make sense to too many people. It's just so easy, right? But we don't have any good cyborg examples. We don't have any old men like me telling people how to think. One of the things I love is using passphrases. So I use really long passphrases, like the things my husband has said to me that are very loving. I played my happy playlist for Alex the other day. So I have a lot of emotional playlists on Spotify I share with people. I like to add emojis to a lot of things. And it's just important to remember these devices can be a great way. On my actual devices, I actually have file systems that are actually divided up into kind of values. I used to keep my phone into the 7 deadly sins for their folders. So I knew what apps were doing for me. I do them by value now. It's an old slide. I use a lot of apps that allow me to measure things like serendipity. So not like how many steps I take, but how many times I tell my spouse I love them or I help out a stranger. I love anything that quantify kindness that way. I think it's really powerful to see those trends. Photos are amazing. The first 6 months I was with my husband, he would send me selfies all the time, and I thought, why are you so vain? I swear I did. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to tell you. I was like, I don't, But he's attractive, but I don't need to see a picture of you every day. But then we were at dinner one night, and he says, some of these are so hard to make. How come you never say anything back? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, press on the picture. And I'd forgotten about live photo. And what he had done is the first 6 months we were together, every single photo he sent me had a message embedded in it, either a kiss or something he held up telling me that he loved me. And I realized in that moment, I had to stop judging on how people love, because love is faster than silicon. My husband had found a way to send me messages of love that I wasn't even looking for because I assumed something about who he was. And this is kind of the problem. Right? It's personal technology, but we need to realize that people are still finding ways to love. Something we do in our home is before I leave the house, I tell Alexa and all the devices to set up reminders so that while I'm gone, my husband gets messages like, be good to yourself at school. And then I also do the same thing on the apps on his phone so he gets updates. You know? There's so many ways when my mother and I would sit together and write down what was important and how we loved each other. Remember when your mom would put notes in your lunchbox? You can still do that. One of my other favorite ones, this one's a little bit more difficult, is setting location-based reminders for the grocery store to talk to cashiers and ask them if I can help them. A lot of times we treat cashiers as just like, you know, you're just doing a role. But, you know, service people, they're frontline people. And this has been a thing for me since 2015. Another thing I love to do is, you know, you can DoorDash and other things. I've been DoorDashing a lot my first day here. I always send the special instructions to tell the DoorDasher to be kind to themselves and let them know if I can help them instead of how to make my sandwich. Right? So these are all kind of, I hope you're seeing like there's some really mindful ways and kind of beautiful ways you can use this. And I always like this idea of let each connection be a reminder of what you value. So the art of appiness, again, some really simple things you can do. Some desktop wallpapers and phone wallpapers. Lock screens are a great place to put things. I always tell people, you know, I read a phone. I do iPhone palmistry. I did someone earlier where I fly around the world and I have a booth, looks like a fortune teller booth. And people wait in lines and hand me their phones. I look at their home screen and tell them about what they value, just from their home screen. It's really creepy. I actually teach a class at Dartmouth to new physicians if they have an unresponsive patient and they can see the phone, like what's going on with that patient's life. But also I would tell people, you know, try to clear your, I met one person here today who had a clear home screen. I was like, I just wanted to hug her. Also, like, remove as many icons as you down there. Grayscale is a great way to make your phone kind of less feel overwhelming. I like to use alarms. Alex has seen these go off. I get alarms all day long reminding me of things that are important to help me be more present. Also use other types of context reminders, whether it be location-based or time-based. Games are a great way. These are some of my mindful games. Mountain is amazing if you've never played it. Of course, mindfulness apps. Again, I just think I really struggle with them charging you to sit still. In kindergarten, it was punishment. Now you can pay premium for it. Right? So, and then finally, you know, there are lots of mindfulness apps that now have interfaces into the home. One of the most mindful things I always love doing, asking people to do, it's kind of difficult, is go to your phone. If you don't use 24-hour time, switch it to 24-hour time. It'll really blow your mind. Like, what's 13? It's 1 o'clock. Also, switch your time from Fahrenheit to Celsius, whichever one you don't use. It teaches you something more and it slows you down quite a bit. If you've got your battery percentage turned on, turn it off. I've never met a couple where couples always have one will have it on and one will have it off. I'm like, okay, you're meant for each other. And one of the other things you can do with iPhones, there's an automation. So you can, any social media app, you can actually launch the social media app with an automation. But what I do is all my social media apps, the automation launches a screen to remind me to rest for a moment before I get in. So it's like a little extra step to slow you down. It's so much fun. This one will blow your mind. Anybody on Facebook? You ready to have your minds blown? So Facebook, this, what do you see here? All these things, right? How many hours ago? How many likes? How many comments? This guy is genius. You should have him speak here at the university. His name is Ben Grosser out of New York. He wrote an interface you can download, anyone can download, called the Facebook Decremeter. And what it does is it removes all of the data from Facebook. You don't know when anything happened or who liked it. It's amazing just to consume stuff because it's good. Does it on Twitter, does it on TikTok, takes all the vanity metrics out. I always tell people, if you can use your social media without vanity metrics for a day, you're a good person. You don't realize how much they're driving you. See, we have a choice in how we work with technology, but our technology gives us a choice in how we work. Our technology, and you have technology in how you work with your choices too. So number 4, see how technology is a time machine. I've really thought about how my relationship to time has changed over the years, you know, me getting more into the moon cycles and stuff, and thought about how we're really kind of in this experience now where everything feels emergent instantly as biological mechanical systems start to come together. So I started thinking about you know, simple things people could do. Obviously, on all devices now, you can set the kind of sun up to sunrise. A lot of them automatically change colors throughout the days. That's a really simple thing you can do to kind of make you aware of where you are in the day. If you have a wearable, I always encourage people to use the astronomical phases so you understand where you are in the moon cycle. I love the one that shows you where you are around the sun each day. I always tell people one of the coolest things you can do with Facebook is go send a post to yourself in the future, because Facebook will give it back to you a year from now. So create a post where you tell yourself how you're doing in the year. And then a year from now, when it serves you back your memory, you can see how you were doing. It's kind of fun. There's an app called Dabble Me that'll send you emails from yourself in the past. Because like I said, when we think about how these things make us feel, it's super important. I love food logging apps. I like to log food I might eat to see how bad it's going to make me feel. Right? So time travel within an app, right? So again, it's super important. And then the last but not favorite one is I've been talking a lot about Amazon. Alex and I were talking about Amazon too. This is my favorite one. So you know what it's like to shop on Amazon, right? It puts all these, you can see the dollar amounts and everything. Well, this app called Time Well Spent allows you to put in your yearly salary and then doesn't show you the prices of things, but how long you have to work to get them. Right. So when you can see how much of your life is being sucked away by something you don't need, it's a little bit different than thinking it's only $11. That's 3 minutes away from the people you love, right? So it's kind of important. You know, and I really believe anxiety is just an improper relationship with time. You know, use your state, not your time, to navigate your day. And last but not least, this is a controversial one. I call it the death sack. So if possible, make sure you go and set up all your legacy contacts regardless of your age, because it's nice to tell people how you'd like to be remembered. This is a great little app called We Croak. It sends you messages throughout the day reminding you you're going to die. They're a little jarring at first, but you get used to the idea of, okay, I'm not immortal. Maybe I should be nice to this stranger. One of the things, is another app I love called Progress Bar. It takes all the battery icons out of your devices and replaces them by where you are in your life. Deadline will look at your behavior every day and calculate how much life you have left and send you messages if you add or subtract life from you, which leads with the idea you only have to die, but everything else is a choice. See, technology can either be good or easy, but it can't be both. It can't be both. A lot of people have trouble with this one. They're like, that's not true. No, it can be good or easy, but it can't be both. So some resources for you guys to wrap up. Again, this talk is online. I'm sure they'll send it out. But you can scan that and be able to get the entire slide deck with all the slides in it. I also built a website just for this event called themindfulcyborg.com, which has all the resources, all of the tools, so you don't have to think, you have to go find them. You can either go to the Mindful Cyborg or scan that. Everybody here, a copy of my book, if you go to that link, chrisdancy.com/book, you can read basically everything you just heard. Care Table, which is the first thing I built that logs all my feelings. You can go download a copy of that for free. Start logging your feelings, the people who make you feel good, people who make you feel bad. Caretable.app, pretty simple, just a really simple little interface if you've never used it. Phone palmistry, so if you'd like me to read your phone, you can upload your phone screen here. I'll read it and send it back to you. Tell you what types of things I think are important to you. It always blows people's mind. And last but not least, this is actually my email, phone number, my address. My phone number is literally on my website. My friends will tell you I get phone calls from people I don't know all the time because I think it's so important for you to know that you can talk to people who don't know you, who care about you, because it's what they value. And that's what I value. I value each and every one of you who made time to come out today. Last point, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. But without an opinion, you're just another machine with data. And I think it's so important we kind of let that sink in. I appreciate everybody for coming. I'm sorry if I ran over. You've been a great audience.